Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending where you are in the world. My name is Troy Dumoulin, and I'm the Vice President of Research, Innovation, and Product Development here at Pink Elephant. We're going to begin our webinar now on the business value of lean IT. And just to give you some context, I've been working in the the service management industry in general now for 18 years with Pink Elephant and several years before that in an IT technical role. And I have to say that over all of the years of working with various frameworks, various continual improvement methodologies, my introduction to lean a few years back was probably one of the most profound areas of personal development and insight into how to improve business effectiveness of anything in my entire career. And since then, I've become a very passionate advocate of lean principles applied to the IT industry. Of course, lean not being new, it's been around for, well, actually, some could argue since the early 1900s. But the reality is, it's relatively new in its use and its positioning within the context of a services and a professional services industry such as IT. And there's development around that relative to understanding how lean can be applied to IT value streams and how it can be applied and used in context and concert with the other frameworks we're very familiar with around service management, such as ITIL or TOGAF or CMMI and Agile and those types of methodologies. In fact, the Agile and the DevOps community use lean quite a bit in the context of helping to establish faster pace of iterations and release to production. So our conversation today is going to be, what is the business case, the business value of lean in the concept of what does it do and why should I care? Our agenda for this interview and this session webinar today would be as follows. First of all, I'm going to establish the need for lean. Why do we need to step onto a lean scale and to consider carefully our current state in respect to what the business vision and mission is for our organizations. So, first I have to get you to the point that you see the value proposition, and the first step of the 12-step process is, yes, I potentially have a challenge that I need to overcome. Then we're going to talk about the nature of change, and the nature of change relative to improvement, because as we understand, there's anything possible. There's a difference between incremental improvements where we can make rapid improvements versus large transformation, and lean deals with those. And mostly lean's focus on the incremental. We'll talk to you about Kaizen and what is a Kaizen and how does that work. Now, without standard work, Kaizens would be very difficult to actually achieve because the very nature of standard implies that someone has determined what should be, what good looks like, what is my true north. And so we're going to talk about the importance of standard work and the concept of the fight against entropy, the fight against the concept of relativism and subjectivity. This takes us into velocity versus agility. The word agile is a very popular word today, but we have to be careful because agile without proper direction can actually be detrimental to the entire premise that agile is trying to promote. So we're going to get into what is the difference between velocity and agility, and then we'll look at the area of working harder, smarter, not harder, in the context of identification of waste. And then finally, we'll look at it from a purely business bottom line perspective. All said and done, this is all nice and the concept of continuous improvement we get, but what does it actually mean in a quantified model for understanding how we improve business objectives? This is our final point of our seminar today. Now, the timing for this, it is a pretty feature-rich content and a fairly aggressive agenda. Will be about 55 minutes, and I'll make it entertaining and keep it well-paced to make sure that it's meeting needs and fit for purpose. So let's begin with the general premise of lean. So lean is, what is it? It's often been accused of simply being kind of an identification of waste and continually to focus on waste. And while waste is part of lean, that's very, very much a narrow view of its overall perspective. Lean for me is a continual improvement methodology. It's a quality approach that looks at how do we continue to improve operational excellence based initially on clearly defined values based on voice of customer, our true north, and that clearly defined value engages people at the source, at the root of where this work happens, into a culture of quality by focused on improvement of multiple things. That could be safety in the workplace, it could be morale, quality, flow, cost, productivity. Simply being lean is a CSI methodology. It's one actually my favorite approaches to how do you structure continual improvement, because as we hit the DMAIC life cycle, it actually has some unique characteristics that other quality models perhaps lack. So let's take a look at how this actually applies to service management in the context of IT and specifically business value. Now, the reality is we have to agree that perhaps there's an opportunity for improvement. Now, being an IT professional myself for several decades at this point, I've spent my fair share of time in the trenches, the midnight shifts, getting things done on the weekend, leaving me very little time to actually, do the normal administrative type work like do my email. So that's where I'm typically online at 10 o'clock, just trying to catch up from a day of unplanned actions. And the reality is there's no lack of desire, no lack of will in the IT organization to basically be the best service supplier they can be. So it's not about desire. It's not about, the energy we put in. We put in more than enough energy. In fact, if you ask the average IT professional, do they feel they're putting in, their full day work? I think you would say yes, amen, hallelujah to that. The challenge is not so much how much energy we put into the work we're doing. It's the effectiveness of that work and potentially the redundancy of it as well. So we're going to be talking today about value streams. And at the highest level, we have this concept of plan, build, run, where think of it this way, like a horizontal value stream. We sit down with customers and we receive intake of demand. That demand then is turned into a requirements understanding. That requirements understanding is then built into a blueprint, which is then validated against the demand. We then set a task against a project manager or developer, and that task is complete. We do the validation, the quality assurance, the testing, and then we get to move that to production in such a way it doesn't take down the house of cards. And then, of course, we get the honor of supporting all of the above. The reality is we have always worked in this value stream, this horizontal flow, and I'll use the word factory, although I recognize that for some IT professionals, the word factory is actually offensive. Though if you think about it, we're in a demand-supply environment. We get requirements, we have to generate outcomes. In essence, we do that through a series of connected value streams, and that value stream will not be any faster than the potential bottlenecks that we see there. One of the challenges behind that is that very few organizations govern or manage their environment as this consecutive value stream or parallel value stream. They look at it more from a silo perspective. So we've got an organization focused on plan. Okay, we've got another set of organizations, plural, focused on the build. And we have another organization, again, focused on the run, the operate. The challenge with that is that each of these organizations are focused on their own priorities, their own vision, their own objectives. And while there's some value to that, the reality is they have to also work as one consecutive organization, one value stream in a sense. But this silo-based model has generated unfortunate results. And that's the fact that we have a huge fragmentation issue. In fact, we've got redundant practices everywhere. If you think about it, I work with organizations to help them implement service management, and I very rarely ever find a lack of process. It's actually the opposite. I find multiple ways to do things, multiple ways to manage change, multiple ways to capture inventory, multiple tools to do all of the above. This causes issue of flow, and the fragmentation specifically causes issue of scalability. So it's not vertically we have our challenge, it's the horizontal flow of value generation. And so while we've been able to get work done, if you follow this dotted line, what has become the challenge is that sheer muscle, energy, effort, sweat, equity is simply no longer scalable to the point where we can actually keep up with the speed of business. Now, this is a problem because you can see in the risk gap concept, what this has done now is basically put us in a position where we are not able to meet business demand of speed. Now, I'm going to add one more component to that. If you continue to add complexity to our value environment, our value system, by adding additional third-party suppliers, adding, cloud options, you're adding complexity, which is adding the potential for risk, which is adding the potential for defect, which is going to kill flow. So it's not only that we see this dotted line actually, stable, it's actually declining down to the right bottom corner, because we haven't yet understood and managed and governed the organization as value stream. So this begins the conversation of why you should care about thinking about horizontal flow of work through the factory, and how it's incredibly important to begin looking at the flow between steps, not simply the activity-based subject matter expertise of each step in itself. Because any system, and this is a principle called theory of constraint, will not be any faster than its limiting bottlenecking constraint, if you will. So we'll continue on to kind of unpack this a little bit. Now, like other service management type of frameworks, Lean begins with the view of the customer value proposition. Value in the eye of the voice of customer is where everything begins and ends. Now, this voice of customer, as we're going to see on the next slide, is not the only voice we have to pay attention to, but as far as what we do, why we do it, what things we're working on, this is where we begin the journey of prioritization. It's, of course, in the agile space, we talk about user stories and user story backlogs, because this is the premise. We begin saying we're an outcome-based organization. What are those outcomes and who should prioritize them but the service consumer and the customer of this outcome? Now, the next part of Lean, these are principles of belief. If you go straight up in this picture, we begin understanding that value is always delivered by value streams. Everything in life is the product of a process. We have a goal we want to achieve, we have raw inventory, and we have a set of activities which transfer that inventory into an outcome. So whether I'm talking about delivering a service, whether I'm talking about resolving a service disruption, or I'm onboarding a new employee, or I'm even getting my sleepy kid from his bed through breakfast and into a seat at school, everything in that context is the flow of a value stream. The reality is it's difficult to improve the customer experience without understanding and visualizing what that value stream is end to end. The next component of that, though, is once I visualize it, that's the value stream, I have to understand that just in time, that I make sure that I'm on time, getting my son and daughter at school before the first bell is key, but there are 1,001 things that could interrupt the flow of that process, whether the alarm clock didn't go off or the shower is a capacity. The reality is I have to identify what aspects of my value stream are potentially not allowing me to meet my objective for deadline. Because while I can deliver the outcome, if I deliver that outcome a day late and $2 too much, I'm still not actually achieving the goal here. So flow and understanding impediments to flow will be something we unpack even further in our conversation today. Now, a key component of that is pull, because we have a tendency in IT to not have very clear demand channels. So we don't have necessarily a good setup of understanding of how do I have intake of demand funneled into the IT organization, how do I prioritize that. So often we'll do what we call push in Lean. We'll say, these are the things I think I should be working on, versus pull, where we're defining that prioritization based on flow, based on pull concepts driven by customer value. And then finally, we consider and agree that, while perfection is this unattainable, future premise, it's something we never stop thinking about. We continue to strive towards improvement. So these are general principles that Lean brings to us. Many of these, of course, you've seen in other concepts and other approaches, but some of the practical tools which underpin these principles are unique to a Lean premise. So I mentioned a minute ago that we have to consider the value from the view of the customer. And so there's the voice of customer. Lean is majorly into VOC. But that's not the only voice that we have to consider. Because if I look at only the user stories and the user backlog as the premise for prioritization, I may not make the right choice. I may consider the need to actually update or address a legacy system. The voice of business comes in where, yes, here's the thing that I'd like to do, but I'm not currently doing, the net new value proposition. But if I don't address this underlying storage area network or network issue, or if I actually deliver you a service which is actually more expensive than the revenue I'm actually receiving for that service, these are not good scenarios either. So we have to be wise in the way we prioritize, and we have to also understand the things which are also simply the things we need to do for regime. Now, the reality is, of course, then we have the voice of legislation. So one of the challenges we have here is these competing voices. I've got voices in my head, right? But Lean makes us think through all of these voices and bring a balanced view, because we have different objectives. In the plan build organization, we have this must do it quickly. In the run organization, we say we must protect, we must stabilize, we must assure. We can't go one to the other. There's not this swing of pendulum from one extreme to the other. We need to think about value from all three areas, if you will. Now, some people, when they consider Lean, as I mentioned earlier in the agenda, think about Lean in the context of, well, it's just about waste. It's all about where do I find the next opportunity to strip waste out of my environment, thereby, of course, making it more efficient, more effective, hopefully. But it's not just about waste. You could almost look at Lean like a problem management solving approach, a strategic methodology for identifying how do I move myself from currently where I am, my current state, to a target state. Remember, we talked about the reality is that with Lean, we first have to understand what is the goal, what is the objective, what does good look like, what is my true north. And then as I understand my true north, I begin looking at all the possibilities for improvement, and believe me, I'm sure you will find yourself to be a target-rich environment. Not all of those, though, have the same benefit and or strategic view towards mission. So Lean isn't simply about going out there and playing whack-a-mole with the most recent and the most visible component of where do I put my finger in the dike. Because we might be thinking there's an opportunity for waste reduction and a Kaizen improvement, like the boy on the left in our cartoon, but we miss the bigger picture. And as you can see, money is just being trucked off, and that's not what Lean is. Lean is a much more strategic view of here's the total picture, and how do we systematically, through business validation and business prioritization, identify the 80-20 perspective of the best and most opportunistic view of improving mission. So be careful when you think about it simply from the point of view of see waste, kill waste. This is not exactly where we're going. Okay, so moving forward, let's talk about the nature of change. Now, one of the challenges that we have is that there are all types of possibilities for improvement. There, of course, are the major transformation objectives. And we have this vision where we're going to take the whole organization in a completely new direction. We're going to have, these 5 business units all align their processes, and they're going to be on one platform, and we're going to move that organization through a major transformation to this new entity. Now, all of that's good. And in service management, we talk about service management journeys and ITSM programs or architecture renewal efforts, or SDLC, complete renovations of methodology. But those are transformation. And in Lean, we'd call that kakushin. That's a Japanese word meaning large change. Kayaku is the concept of, we are here and we're going to move to this major step. It's not total transformation, but we're adding a complete new feature set to this application and or service. So it's a large step change. Where Lean focuses mostly is in the area of Kaizen. The premise being that a series of small incremental opportunities for improvement done at a grassroots level, when you are added all these up, first of all, The concept of Kaizen is we can do it quickly, and we can do it, in a sense, without huge implications of cost and or effort. But if I can actually identify small elements of Kaizen and do them iteratively over and over and over again, first of all, my likelihood for success is going to be higher because of the nature and the scope of that change. But also, the small incremental changes over time can have massive impact and improvement. So Lean, when it comes to the problem identification, is focused on Kaizen. Not that we can't look at the larger transformation objectives, but the real value in my personal view is this focus on see a challenge, understand its context in the larger scope of things, and put the key stakeholders together within a 5-day period of time, fix something and make life better, and do that again, and do that again, without need for major budgets, without need for major improvement initiatives to be, to be assessed and validated. Kaizen, incremental change. I'm not saying that larger transformations don't have their place. We all are part of major projects in that context, but we have to recognize that we're probably going to be doing both. When it comes to service management types of initiatives, we typically do exactly that. We have the large program, but we have these small service improvement initiatives that we're doing on the side, these Kaizen events. So take a page out of Mr. Steve Jobs. The reality is he believes in incremental and transformation has its place, but there's I would say, place for both. Let's now continue on with the view of the premise of standard work. We live in a world, in a society that values the right to your own opinion. This is called relativism, where everyone's truth is equal. There is no concept of shared truth, because my truth is equal as to your truth, and while that might make sense in the context of your own individual position of how you look at life and your philosophy of life, relativism doesn't work when it comes to an organization. In an organization, we have to agree what is true, right? This is what the expectation is. This is the expected outcome. This is the expected way we get there. Now, this is the premise of standard work. I have a saying that I like to share, that is, what is not defined, written down, cannot be stabilized and or controlled, because until then it's subjective. What is not stabilized cannot be measured, at least effectively and holistically and repeatedly, and what is not measured cannot be improved. Now that logic tree begins with this premise that before I can improve anything, I have to understand what that thing should be, standard work. Whether that's a current state process or a future state process, I have to identify what does good look like, or at least this moment's view of good. Because a key component of this is that standard work never stays standard, because in that case we wouldn't be improving. This concept of standard work is critical because many of the processes in IT simply are not standard at all. They wouldn't get hit past they get hit by a bus syndrome. The process is stable enough as long as that one individual comes to work every day and continues to do it. But after that, of course, we know what happens if that doesn't happen. So this premise of standard work is incredibly important because before I can actually apply a Kaizen, an improvement initiative, to anything, I first have to define what should be. So this premise of standard work is an initial baseline. And then from that baseline, I see where I am relative to where I should be, that's standard. And then I can close the gap, problem solving, and apply a Kaizen. Now it's important that once I move the ball up the hill a little bit, which is this ever-going process we're in, I have to then reestablish standard by establishing the new what should be. So I have to document and I have to understand ownership in respect to having controls in place. So this concept of standard work shouldn't be something that we shy from. It's the entire basis for improvement. So it's incredibly important to understand the value of standard work. And standard work isn't necessarily the concept of best practice. It's what does it need to be at this moment, and how far am I from that perspective? And then once I get there, let's reestablish standard until the next Kaizen. So if you've got a standard work that never evolves, you have bureaucratic and perhaps processes which don't continue to instill relevancy for the business objective. So incredibly important for business value is to continually pushing the bar up this hill and ensuring that we have places and things in place like standard work to ensure the ball doesn't roll back and we basically revisit things we improved 5 years ago. We see this all the time in IT with when we see people continue to churn through positions and leadership. Things that we improved a year later, not only are they where they were, they're perhaps even less and less effective than they were when we began. Standard work. Let's start to unpack the premise of velocity. Okay, so velocity. Agile is this word that is very popular, and in the context of its premise, it's actually not bad. So when I think about agile and I think about the word agility, I think about terms such as flexibility, quick to move, the ability to, on a dime, turn in one direction and then turn in another direction on the next dime as it rolls down the hill. The reality is agility in itself is not bad. Now, I want you to go back to that concept of value systems. Okay, if this concept of plan, build, run, or in ITIL, strategy, design, transition, operations, right, the same model, if the various agents and or stakeholders in this value system are all being agile in different directions because they have different premise of objective, they don't share priorities, they don't share common beliefs, then if each of these value agents in the context of our organization are all being agile in different directions, you have to ask yourself, what is happening to velocity? Velocity is actually defined by speed with direction. So a critical component from the premise of ensuring and improving velocity, flow improvement, and throughput, we have to ensure that all of the agents in the value system, all of the stakeholders, are all moving in the same direction. This is a key component that Lean brings to all service management premises so that all of the people, my wife and I in the family context, are working towards the same objectives with the same priorities. Otherwise, we're working cross-purpose, and I can see that you can probably get that pretty simply by the picture on the screen. Incredibly important to think of value streams. Now, when I think about value streams, I can think about the concept of a process, because some people use them synonymously. The process is a value stream. There is some distinction between them when we actually start thinking about value stream analysis, but at the high level, let's for the moment understand, yes, a value stream is this abstract concept of I've got a goal, I have input, I have actions, I have an outcome, and I have to get that through to get the goal done. From a business perspective, that process has to hit a number of key parameters. First of all, it's the right actions, so I'm not doing stuff I shouldn't be doing. They're performed correctly, so there's no errors, otherwise I have to go back and do rework, and that's killing flow. It's the right sequence, because if I get this thing out of order, I might miss something, and now, of course, I've got issues with flow again, and or quality. The right time, that's important, because we're going to look at the fact that one of the unique things that Lean brings to the table is not that we're just doing the right thing, but it's happening at the right time and right speed. A lot of best practices, they show you the concept of what's the perfect scenario, I guess best being the context here, the ideal situation that should be in this situation, whether I'm developing applications or, managing changes. But here's the important thing. I have to look at good or best practice through the filter of right level and right speed. I have to look at it from the point of view of time. And then in the end, I have to ensure that all three aspects of value are being hit. The benefits being realized. I'm doing it from the point of view of risk and ensuring that we don't, do something stupid relative to protection and security. But the third component, resource optimization, speed, I have to do it also. If I only deliver your benefit and protect you, but I don't give you speed, I'm not achieving the goal. So in that premise, any service organization basically has three core value streams in the abstract layer. This is all business organizations, whether you're a line of business, whether you're HR, whether you're facilities, whether you're an IT service organization. the basic concepts are the same. I have concept to launch, where here's a new 401k or RRSP type product, and I have this concept to it's now available for the constituency, right? I have the ability now that this service has now been in design and available for use and consumption to deliver that, relative to now can I have another one of those, please? And finally, because any service organization who has product and services has to be also a support organization, it's important to see that we are in a position of support. So these basic constructs are the primary high-level value streams of any organization. Now, in an IT context, we have some unique ones. So I'll give you some examples. One source you can go and look for and look at is the Open Group. And this is an association that you might be familiar with. They work around multiple standards, around security, architecture. One of the outcomes of the Open Group is called the IT for IT operating model or value stream. And as you an overall model that has identified 4 core value streams in the context of demand and supply. And if you go to their documentation, you'll see each of these value streams, of course, has more detail, and it gets down into the dependencies, and not only the dependencies within inside each value stream, but how does one then lead to the other. Remember, we're looking for bottlenecks. We're looking for issues of flow. And to manage the practice of delivery of services, we have to look at how the engine, how the factory is generating, where's work in all of these value streams? Where's my bottleneck, and how do I increase the flow and velocity? You're probably very aware that one of the biggest challenges the business has with IT is speed. That's largely because we don't manage speed. We look at more task specialization by activity and not really understand where our impediments to velocity are. This is a key consideration that Lean brings to the table. Now, if you want to look at it more generally, the way I like to look at service management is like this. I've taken the ITIL processes here, and I've put the build processes in the middle, and which ITIL should have done, by the way, since the beginning. It alludes to it, but doesn't give us a good sense of that. So I like to look at it like this. On the front end of this factory, we have storefront processes where demand comes in, whether that's incident management for an operations kind of break fix or request, whether we got a service desk, the service catalog through the automated ordering process, or the business relationship management role. All of these are customer-facing intake process for demand. We would then align portfolio decisions based on analyzing all of these demand channels, so that processes in the strategy context then say, here are all the possibilities for improvement, the backlog, if you will, the opportunities for portfolio, and we consider that relative to what projects and our initiatives we begin in charter. So, that drops down into this build project portfolio component, and whether classic waterfall or agile, it doesn't really matter. Someone's building something. In this middle construct, we have the feature build and the functional focus coming through. But what's also important, as you can probably well imagine, is that not only do we enable our sprints with feature-based requirements, but we also consider non-functional, and that's where design and transition come into play. I have to assure that my development activity has the right supplier integration, the right disaster recovery consideration. Service levels have been established. The support models being created. We've got great and good design around performance and availability through the business cycle. This is a key component to ensuring the business value of when this thing actually arrives in production, that not only does it actually exist, but it doesn't do harm when it's there. Right, remember there's 3 components to value. Benefit, you get the feature you want. Risk, I don't, put you in a position where you're compromised and you're liable now to an external market because of loss of business intelligence. And of course, throughput, I have to do this fast enough to keep it moving. And as I move this through, I have, of course, to move it into production in such a way that I coordinate and orchestrate, and then as it now is available as a service on the right-hand side, I get to support it. And hopefully, please, hopefully, we've got a few lessons learned, because nothing is perfect, and we ship those back on the bottom as lessons learned into our factory. Think about it this way. A lot of people who improve process relative to any one of these activities look at even that process as a silo. And unfortunately, that's a problem because we can implement new silos when we implement processes, any specific one process. We have to understand the whole value chain of premise. And this is where understanding it from a lean perspective of flow and how things flow from left to right in this context, and then feedback come through the bottom end, is incredibly important for continuing to deliver value. The factory of IT. So now let's, in the next part of our session, focus on what lean is more classically known for, which is the waste premise. Because, the question is, it's difficult to get onto the lean scale. Sometimes we've just got to do it, even though we don't want to know what we will find there. The concept here, of course, is that we're working smarter, not harder. We have less resources than ever to get things done. It's not likely that our budgets will increase year over year going forward, as some organizations may have enjoyed in the past. Simply put, every year we're being asked to do more with less, but yet somehow we've got to achieve that result. So funding and resourcing for those types of activities must come from within. We've got to find some ways to reposition and reinvest current resources into other work. This is where we begin figuring out what do we do and what should we do. To introduce this concept, let's first start with this premise of the 3 M's. Probably the most famous of the 3 M's, muda, these again Japanese words, is what are the things that we're doing today in our work streams and our organizations that we really shouldn't be doing? The fact that we have, reports that we generate that no one reads, the concept of that I create features in this product that no one's asking for, the concept of it's just silly stuff. We somehow have got onto this activity of doing it this way, and we never ask why, because that's the way we've always done things. But that's not the only concept of waste. There's also mura, variance, variation, redundancy. And this is where an organization understands that variation kills flow, first of all, because the more ways I have to manage change, which somehow have to connect, will actually impede flow because of the handovers. Or I have multiples of how to do this, and I have to now bear the cost, the obvious cost of having multiples. I have multiple services, and so I have to bear the cost of having the same service multiple times. I have multiple tools. Of course, that never happens. I go into organizations all the time. That was my facetious sarcasm, by the way. I go into organizations all the time where I see huge redundancy in simply the technologies we use. I mean, I've been at organizations where it gets so silly that the same organization will buy the same tool from the same vendor just because another group wouldn't give them access to it. Well, that variance, that cost of maintaining multiple redundancy of approach and models has a cost, has an impact on flow, has an impact on waste. And then finally, there's muri, overburden. Now, muri is an interesting one because you would think, well, lean has this vision to continually move up the hill towards highest peak of efficiency and effectiveness. Well, be careful because it's always about optimization, not maximization. When any person, human being, or technical resource is maximized at 100+% year over year, decade over decade, or just even day over day, what happens to that resource? The obvious answer is it burns out. Now, not only does it burn out because I've maximized it, I've pushed it beyond its true capacity, it then has no time in its day. That person has no time to consider improvement. So to maximize utilization is the enemy of lean. Lean is to understand how do I optimize balance. Optimization is key here. So critical to understand there are 3 potential M's when we consider waste removal. That brings us to the premise of what kind of work we're talking about. We've got 3 types of work. Anything you do in life can actually be classified 3 ways. There's stuff we do that directly has an implication on the goal, whether that's building a system, whether that's delivering a service, whether that's resolving a support issue. when we do this, it directly impacts the objective. That's value add. We want to optimize that stuff. Then there's stuff that we do, which we need to do because it's like going to the gym. We simply have to keep ourselves fit. We have to do this to keep the process glued together. We have to do a certain amount of administration so that it's governing in the position, the fact that we have this in place, because at some point, if we didn't, it would actually all de-evolve. This is necessary non-value. It's still good, it's necessary, but it's key not to do too much. And this is a key component when you're applying lean to a service management framework like ITIL, to say how much administration is too much. Because you want just enough, not simply because it's the best practice. So in each organization, this is the fit for purpose assessment of what is enough. For some processes, it might be a single page. In other processes, you might need a 3-ring binder. But not all processes require 3-ring binders. For my Get the Kids to School process, I don't have a 3-ring binder, but there are some tasks and things on the fridge that I identify. And finally, the component of this stuff here is simply not adding any value. It has to go. So the whole premise of resolving the same incident over and over and over and over again without ever asking why would be a classic example of waste. That stuff we have to remove with extreme prejudice because life is too short and we don't have the time to do stuff that doesn't matter. So all of these concepts that we're talking about, when we're thinking about moving this value stream and making it more efficient in its flow, all of these concepts of waste could potentially kill flow. Whether those are defects and now we have to go redo it, whether those are problems that we have not identified and removed the base concept of why this is happening over and over again, whether I've got too much variation and redundancy or inflexibility because I only have a release cycle every 6 months, but the business needs it to be much more rapid than that. Overburdening resources to the point they get sick and they go home and they make mistakes. Overproduction where we get too many things printed, too many things ordered, and now I've got inventory sitting on a shelf basically capturing dust with cost of inventory being tied up. Whether I'm waiting between steps, bottlenecks, this concept of here's the flow and here are the things which impede the flow, this is a critical analysis to how to ensure that we have this cycle time speeding up faster and faster and faster to the point we can go no faster, because at some point the principle of theory of constraint says a system will reach its optimum, not maximum velocity. And the optimum velocity will always be governed by some bottleneck. All systems have bottlenecks. Bottlenecks in themselves are not a problem, but it's the speed of the flow that's the thing we're trying to govern. So consider our conversation so far as we come to a close in the last few minutes. So we've identified, that one of the challenges we have today is we're not able to scale. We're not able to meet business demand. What got us this far is not taking us further. The fragmentation of purpose and approach, the waste we are currently handling, simply will not allow us to meet business objectives at the speed needed. So the question I put before everyone on the call today is there opportunity for improvement? Are we indeed a target-rich environment? As you read through a couple of the bullets, I think you might start to feel a little bit uncomfortable as you squirm through some of these, because I see these over and over and over again. I like that first one, right? I've been in places where there are so many service desks. Of course, it's a large organization. The organization has to set up another service desk just to call when you don't know what service desk to call. And rather than dealing with the concept of point of contact and understanding flow, the challenge here is that really, until we got to this point in history where the money isn't just flowing in and we're getting another 10%, 15% every year to add to the IT budget, we haven't been asked to focus on waste. If you take a hard look at your organization, the stuff that we do just because we've always done it, I think you would be hard-pressed not to acknowledge there's an opportunity for lean. Just saying. So one area that is kind of unique to lean is the concept of value stream analysis. So as a consultant, and I've been with Pink now for 18 years, I've spent a whole career helping organizations improve process, and design process and implement new process on a tool, etc. But what I didn't understand until I had been introduced to the lean tools a few years ago, I never took the process to its final step. So the first objective in any process, whether it's an SDLC or an engineering or a business process, is to begin with, okay, what's the goal? What's the voice of customer requirement? Yeah, we start there. We then map it out to say, okay, who are all the key stakeholders, the players, the people putting stuff into the process, people doing the process, people at the other end receiving. But then we go to what is the classic workflow. This is where we do process design. And you've been there, I'm sure, in your career many times, where you're working with a Visio diagram and you're creating flows and you're creating a RACI diagram, or perhaps you're moving it to a swim lane. That's all well and good. That's called a process flow or a workflow. But that's not the final step in process design. Until I was introduced to lean, I didn't understand that. What is then important is to take that process flow and to put it into a lean value stream analysis template. And that's what you see in front of you here. In the blue boxes, these are the primary activities, okay, of the processing question. In those blue boxes, the little right bottom corner, this was the design or the standard time. This is the time I expected specific actions and activities to take to complete. And, you can calculate your expected time, your projected time, and get a sense of what you think is what's called cycle time, the time for process to begin and end. Stuff comes in and it comes out the other end in this time frame. But the reality is that's probably not reality. So an actual assessment would be where you go with the process flow, you go to where the gemba happens. This is the Japanese word meaning to go to where the work actually happens. And the bottom line, which is below the blue boxes, represents the actuals. Now notice, not only do we have different numbers in some cases for the actual versus the standard or projected time, but what's key to understand is that between steps we have wait times. The reality is that most time spent in delivery outcomes is not actually spent in value-added activities. It's spent in the waiting time between steps. To truly understand how long it takes to onboard a new employee, you would have to do a value stream analysis and say, okay, actually in this case, what we've got going on, when I consider the average lead time of this process in case change in this case is 20 days. Now you might say, wait a minute, changes, the activities don't take 20 days, but the process cycle time does. And that's the true customer experience. Now, let me put this in the context of bottom line. Would you agree that time is money? Time has a quantification we can apply to it. There are salaries. There are things which are not happening because the longer this delays, the thing doesn't occur. The reality is it's pretty easy to come up with a way to quantify an hour of time and say, this costs this much, even if it was just the activity of what's happening in the process, the labor hours, put it that way. The way that you can quantify a process or a value stream is what's called process cycle efficiency, and this is the calculation in the bottom right corner. So what you have here is 352, which is the actual time of each process step, the 12, the 15, the 75. Okay, that's the actual time of the value-added activity. But then the 5284 is the total time, including wait, from the point of lead, where the button is pushed, to the point it comes out the other side. The calculation then gives me the ability to say, okay, 352 divided by 5284 gives me a process cycle efficiency of 6.6%. Now, apply a lean analysis by cutting down wait times. By not even cutting down wait times, but in each activity time, killing the waste, minimizing the necessary non-value, you could actually get time gain within each activity as well. And you could literally show your mathematical and quantifiable analysis an improvement, say, let's say from 6.6 to 7.4, just arbitrarily. From that perspective, having then burdened an hour of time with some quantifiable measure, you can arguably and logically show how you have saved the business and or the company X thousands of dollars relative to process improvement. Now, I don't know about you, but for years, I have dreamed of a way to do this in a way that everyone would agree with. How do I show the business value of process improvement? Well, this is one of the primary tools for doing that. Now, one more thing about this. So you've gone through your process design, you've created your Visio workflow, you've created your swim lane. Consider this. If you don't do the value stream analysis and don't make the process fit for purpose, or at least understand its delivery cycle time possibility, ask yourself if you are being responsible with the process you're implementing. I have come to realize personally that I spent a great deal of my career not falling to the last step, and I realize now, to my detriment, I was being irresponsible by not doing a value stream analysis on any process design. That was a bit of a shock for me as a professional. This is one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about fit for purpose. Means take your perfect process and throw it through a value stream analysis for now streamline and optimization, maximization. Final slide, and we'll close our session today. So I've already begun the conversation of bottom line because we've already addressed the concept of, showing financially the concept of process improvement. But let's now just throw it through kind of a model from a business perspective to look at financial gain. So would you agree with me, first of all, that all services which have products have costs? There's inherent cost in managing the resources for delivering it, the skills to execute it. So I've got to maintain, the people and the expertise for that legacy COBOL system. I have to keep them in-house or find a third-party vendor at least to do that. So the more I have relative to variance, redundancy of either the products that I deliver and or the number of processes I have for doing the exact same thing, development, operations, I have a price to pay. That price comes in the context of waste, variation, risk, higher levels of potential for defect, killing of flow, etc. So let's for a moment envision a different world. Let's take this picture here, and I'll start with the top one, which is, people. This is based on the balanced scorecard model. This is from a book called Run, Grow, Transform. Let's say for the moment I did a service catalog, and I consolidated my products and services down from even 5 examples down to 2. Right? I haven't got down to 1, but I've gotten it better than it was. So what happens when I do that? So go to the left. So by removing and consolidating and harmonizing, I'm actually reducing the cost by carrying, the 5. The speed, because I now have reduced variability here, goes up from the point of view of flow because I have less complexity. And because I have less complexity and risk, quality thereby goes up. Now follow the middle to the right. Because I've been able to reduce cost, improve speed, improve quality, I can actually then introduce to the customer improvements in price, better experience. The thing doesn't break as often, which gives them better warranty. Now, there are some customers which don't like the services you provide because they think you're too costly. It's a terrible experience, and first of all, it's not even a great quality, so they won't even talk to you. They'll go out and they'll buy alternative service called shadow IT. So when you improve the customer experience, you get better loyalty. Customers who haven't spoken to you for years actually get to hear on the grapevine that what you're doing is pretty cool. That means you get people willing to talk to you, collaboration, giving you new customers that you were losing because year over year, more and more customers were buying their own services, so that's simply called market share erosion. And new potential for even going into places you've never been before, maybe bringing some of those IT processes into a business context. Now, Let's put it into the context of finance. Because I've now released the inherent cost of inventory of all of this redundancy with both product and multiple processes that do the same thing. I can now release the cash flow that was caught up in the context of these duplicate offers. Now, cash can also be considered time because now people aren't spending all their excess time in managing multiples. So that now is working capital that can be reinvested because it's not now caught up in the inventory, which allows me to improve margin and improve the reinvestment of that resource back into new things the customer wants. You see, with portfolio, if we don't address legacy and consolidate, we always add, we simply add to the multiplication. Always adding new and never removing. Always adding complexity and never simplification. We see all of this going the wrong direction. The premise of lean in this picture can be expressed in direct dollar contribution back to bottom line and net new value creation opportunities, focusing more of the resources on innovation and less on lights on. I hope you can see and sense the passion that I have for this topic, because for me, this is so incredibly important to get this right. Now, because of this, we're working with an organization called the Lean IT Association, and a new certification model is being developed for the application of Lean to the IT environment. Already, the course for foundations, concepts, principles, like we're discussing today, is available, and you can take that this fall. 2 new models or certifications are coming out. One is the Kaizen Lead, which is a course that's focused on running Kaizen events. And another one is on leadership, relative to what does it mean to be a lean leader, empowering improvement where the work happens versus command and control. In 2016, we'll see the introduction of the Lean IT Coach as a certification. I'm a volunteer in this organization because of the passion I have for Lean, and I'm excited about what I'm seeing coming out. And as I teach these classes myself sometimes, the lights that go on in people's eyes as we're talking through this, it's amazing. As I mentioned earlier, of all the things that I've done in my career in the last, X number of years, probably this has been the most impactful thing for me personally. For more reading and information, I'd recommend several books. These are 2 that I'd recommend: Lean IT, and then the subsequent one that's called Run, Grow, Transform. I've had the privilege and honor of being a co-author on this book here. And also, if you need something on a more quick hit basis and you think that's really cool, first of all, this is going to be recorded, this webinar, and you can share this with your colleagues at work. But the reality is I have a blog where I've been actually documenting and doing value-added delivery for a while, and I have a radio show called Practitioner Radio. And it's a podcast. And 3 of the core podcasts here I'd recommend. As you can see, visual management, we haven't really touched that today. Gaining leadership buy-in, that's where we've been focusing on how to use other models like theory of constraints, Six Sigma for CSI. And I would highly recommend taking a look seriously at adding the Lean Foundation to your personal development area. So hopefully I've captured your interest here. Some of the vision that I've been trying to explain has kind of now seeped its way into your minds and your psyche, because there's so much you can do with this. And it's really applicable to any framework of choice. It's totally framework agnostic, whether it's simply to get the kids to school faster process, or it's an SDLC, or it's a run process. These principles are applicable to all of the above. So for more information or for checking out my blog, please take a look and let me know. Follow me on Twitter. I hope you found this interesting, and you'll receive an evaluation and follow-up by Pink Elephant. Thank you so much for your time, because time is precious, as we just said within the Lean context. Take care and have a great day.